Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me again. Today, I am going to share my review of Dungeons & Dragons Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk from Wizards of the Coast. This 224-page adventure supplement is written by Amanda Heyman, Richard Baker, Eitan Bernstein, Mackenzie DeArmas, Ron Lundeen, and Chris Perkins. This hardcover arrives in stores on September 19th. It's going to carry an MSRP of $59.95. As of this recording, you can still do the pre-order bundle from D&D Beyond, which gets you the book and the digital file for that very same $59.95. You'll also get access to the digital file tomorrow, which is September 5th. Also, stay tuned because I am going to reveal the winner of my copy of the friendly local game store edition of Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk. So stay tuned. Let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk. A few things I want to mention before we jump on in. First of all, the fine folks over at Wizards of the Coast were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's very important that you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what's in this adventure and share my thoughts about it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tackle this chapter by chapter, kind of give you a little bit of a brief synopsis of what's going on in each of the chapters, and then I will wrap up with some final thoughts as well as my review score. Lastly, this is an adventure book. So if you are a player hoping your dungeon master is going to pick up Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk, I would probably recommend tune out now because I'm going to try to stay away from really massive spoilers, but there are going to be some spoilers. So you don't want the surprises of the adventure ruined simply because you watched this review. Having said that, though, you probably want to let your dungeon master know about this video so they can approach this book and make an informed buying decision. So let's take a look at the back. What lurks below Phandelver? A beloved town is in unimaginable danger. Whether the heroes are newcomers to Phandelver or are returning after the acclaimed Dungeons & Dragons adventure Lost Mine of Phandelver, they discover hints of a threat lurking below the town. The heroes soon learn that the cult of a malevolent entity has set its sights on transforming Phandelver into the capital of its evil empire. To save the town from oblivion, the heroes must uncover a nefarious plot and confront the otherworldly cultists. Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk is a high fantasy adventure that begins with the familiar story of Lost Mine of Phandelver and then delves into the perilous Underdark, where dangerous secrets fester and evil is afoot. So let's jump on in. One of the first things I want to point out is in my first look video, I kept referring to the town as Phandelver. That's how I pronounced it when I ran the starter set adventure back in, I think it was 2015 that I ran the adventure. But I know somebody had commented, actually it was kind of a smart ass comment that I deleted anyway. So yes, I will make sure that I am pronouncing the town correctly. I don't want anybody out there crying because I said Phandelver rather than Phandelver. So there are a lot of illustrators who worked on Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk. I'm not going to read all their names, but I do want to make sure, give them some credit. I'm not going to read the names because there's so many of them, and I would probably butcher at least half of them. For the most part, artwork throughout is pretty solid. There are a couple of pieces that are sort of like, ho-hum. But all in all, solid artwork throughout. So as I mentioned, we're going to kind of go chapter by chapter here. And first few pages is going to just kind of give you a bit of background about the original adventure. Now, this is remastered as far as the Lost Mine of Phandelver goes. So this is not the exact same adventure as would have been found in the 2014 starter set. So there are some tweaks here and there, some gender changes for some of the NPCs, some racial changes for some of the NPCs, nothing major, nothing that's going to radically change the adventure. One thing I will point out, though, is that when I reviewed the starter set back in 2014, I really liked it a lot, and I really liked Lost Mine of Phandelver. And one of the reasons why is because it picked up on so many tropes from Dungeons and Dragons that as an introductory adventure, it felt like D&D. Very important for an introductory adventure that's part of a starter set. There was also a lot of really good advice for fledgling dungeon masters in that adventure. So I really liked it quite a lot. Now it's being presented as just part of an adventure book. So all those tips and everything are long gone. Now, rather than being an interesting introductory adventure, these first 4 chapters kind of feel a little been there, done that, because we are talking about 9 years later. Also, I'm sure there are some people out there who are going to be kind of wondering, well, I have the starter set. I've run Lost Mine of Phandelver. How much is different in this edition? And truth be told, not a lot. Now, there is the inclusion of these strange goblins that the player characters have never seen before. In fact, most people have never heard of them before. The other goblins are afraid of them, but the players aren't really going to encounter them up close and personal until the 5th chapter, which is the all new material. So in essence, they're hearing about these goblins. They're running across some corpses of these strange goblins. So they're really not going to be dealing with them. This first chapter, pretty traditional beginning to a low-level Dungeons and Dragons adventure. In this case, the player characters are escorting a wagon full of supplies, which is owned by a friend of theirs who's a dwarf who is looking to reopen the mine of Phandelver, the Phandelver Pact mine, which the player characters will not know about. They just understand that they're helping a friend of theirs who has gone ahead of them to Phandelin, and they are going to escort this wagon full of supplies from the city of Neverwinter to Phandelin. They're ambushed by goblins, and hopefully they not only fight off the goblins, but decide to chase these goblins to their hideout, and they'll take it from there. So pretty standard stuff. Granted, it doesn't start off like the really overused, well, you're sitting in the town inn and the adventure begins. Nah, it's a little better than that. And there are different ways for you to kind of tie in the player characters to this dwarven friend. So then they're going to end up in the town of Phandelin, and they're going to meet a variety of different NPCs, and these NPCs all represent different factions. And I know as an introductory adventure, when these various different NPCs were looking to kind of recruit some of the player characters to their faction, and they would give them a pin, like these pins here that we see, to kind of initiate them into the group. Tied in nicely to get the player characters started. Here in this overall adventure, which takes characters from 1st level through 12th level, we have that aspect where it's like, oh, hey, join the faction. And then it's sort of dropped. And I got to be honest, the reality of it is, if you had a secret organization, you certainly would not have your members be wearing some visible object so they could identify each other that was like would stand out, right? So usually secret groups would have somebody wear an item of clothing of a particular color, or maybe they'd have some sort of hand signal or do some oddball signal that most people would be like, what the hell is that? But other members of the group would be like, oh, they're one of us. Not necessarily with a pin. I think it's kind of odd. So what's going to happen here is the player characters are going to meet a bunch of the various different NPCs in Phandelver. Unfortunately, they are pretty two-dimensional as far as NPCs go, which is unfortunate because we already know just from reading the back of the book that this town is in real danger. And it's important that the dungeon master establish a connection with the player characters and the people of this town. Because for one, you're not running a group of murder hobos, hopefully. And if they don't care about the town, they're not going to be invested in this adventure. So Dungeon Master's got a little bit of their work cut out for them as far as that goes. The players are going to encounter these ruffians, these bandits. They're called the Red Brands, and their hideout. And they are going to find out that they're being led by this mage, this glass staff. So they're going to hopefully defeat them, and they're going to, once again, hopefully establish some relationships with some of the various different NPCs in town, who are then going to give them various short quests that they can pursue. That's going to lead into chapter 3, the Spider's Web. And probably this chapter I probably like the best out of the first 4 of the chapters, because it gives the players some agency to kind of approach what they want to approach. There's a few different places that they can go and explore. The biggest one is going to be Cragmaw Castle, where these goblins who have been harassing the town are held up, and where they're being led by this other goblin who thinks he's doing the work of these deities. Turns out he's not. He's just kind of a stooge for them. He thinks he's actually engaged in holy work, but he's certainly not. But the player character is going to have these various little quests that they can go on. They can go and explore this ruined town. If they rescue this one NPC, she's going to tell them about this amulet that was left in her family's establishment. If I remember right, I think they were bakers or something like that in this ruined town. They're also tasked with checking out the ruined town, so they've got a couple of reasons to go to it. And it's important to keep in mind that the area that Phandelver's in is pretty much in ruin, because it had been subject to all of these bandit raids and actual bandit attacks. So many of these towns were abandoned or destroyed, or a lot of these locations were wiped out and they're now in ruins. And the town of Phandelver has kind of been reclaimed by adventurers and people looking to make a change in their lives, and those who are looking to make a profit by establishing businesses. The town itself kind of stands out because everything around it is pretty much in ruin or destroyed or in disrepair. So they can check out this town. They can also go and talk to this banshee, who I actually like that little set piece the best out of these, because the players are sent to talk to this banshee to ask her a question, one question. And they have to be respectful to the banshee. They can't disrespect her, otherwise she's going to attack them. She's very dangerous as far as the players' characters go, because they're pretty low level still. I think they're like 3rd level at this point. And I like it because they can actually ask the one question they've been sent there to ask, or they can ask another question. But they only get one question that she's going to answer. So I like that. It's a bit of a dilemma for the players. So do we have our characters actually do what they were sent there to do? And then the biggest set piece is the Cragmaw Castle, where they are going to encounter the goblins and their leader, and they're going to learn a bit more about these strange psionic goblins. Eventually, they're going to find out that all of this trouble is due to the machinations of the spider. It's the spider, man. So they find out that's their big bad up to this point. The spider has been pulling all these strings. So now they find out where the spider is located and they go to take him on. And pretty interesting developments here. I do like this kind of dungeon crawl that takes place here. Although strangely enough, the spider can try to get away. If he feels that, he's in danger of being captured, he can try to get away. And then it talks about, well, if the players capture him after he tries to get away. So it's kind of like, okay, so I understand what he's looking to do as far as escaping. How are the players going to catch him then? There are kind of some strange turns of phrase as far as how some things are presented in Phandelver and Below. As an example, there's one point where the player characters encounter this group and the group's not going to attack them immediately. The player characters have to be very careful or they will attack. So what it basically says is if they roll a certain DC or higher, then these creatures will stop fighting. But the whole point was you're trying to stop them from attacking. So they haven't attacked yet. How are you stopping them from fighting? They're not fighting amongst themselves. So like I said, there's a few odd turns of phrase. The way some things are presented could have been cleaned up a little bit because they don't necessarily make sense the way you read them. So now we get into the 5th chapter, Paths of Peril. And in Paths of Peril, you're going to find that this is all new material. So everything before this, the first 4 chapters were a remastered Lost Mine of Phandelver. Now, the next 4 chapters is all new content. And the player characters are going to return to Phandelver to find that these strange goblins they've been hearing about have been kind of terrorizing the town. In fact, as the player characters arrive, they find all these townfolk outside. He's not the mayor, but he's like the town leader outside his home, like banging on the doors because they want him to take care of these things. And all these things are going on. All these crimes have been committed and all these different people from the town are disappearing. So in this chapter, the players are going to find themselves investigating some crime scenes. So we have some very short, different set pieces here for these 4 crime scenes, which are going to lead them through the help of an NPC that introduces herself to assist the player characters. They're going to find out where are these goblins coming from. And then the player characters are hopefully going to set out to tackle that. This is where they're going to learn that there are forces at work that are far darker than the player characters probably could have imagined. And it turns out there are these mind flayers who essentially have this plan to turn the citizens of Phandelver into mind flayers and use that town as kind of their beachhead to spread their evil and take over the entire land of Faerun. So that's what the player characters are going to begin to learn as far as the sinister truth. So in the 6th chapter, the player characters find out that there are pieces of this obelisk, and we have encountered these mysterious obelisks in previous D&D adventure books. Sadly enough, even though it was kind of mentioned by folks at Wizards of the Coast that we're going to learn more about the purpose of these obelisks, we really don't. We find out kind of about the obelisk that's outside Phandelver, but we don't find out anything about the obelisk, say from Tomb of Annihilation. So I thought that was kind of weird. So what's going to happen here is the player characters hopefully return to Phandelver, because now they're going to start to see that there's a strange corruption taking place. And it's actually this energy from the far realm that is seeping in. And it's part of it is from these pieces of this obelisk. As you can see here, it's Daisy the cow has mutated. And when I was doing my first look video, I had pointed out that I had kind of heard through the grapevine that there's a bit of a cosmic horror aspect to Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk. And I thought, hey, you know what? With this corruption of the town and the town's people and the flora and fauna, even the buildings start corrupting. I said, you know, I wonder if there's kind of a bit of a color out of space, Lovecraftian vibe going on. And there is a little bit. And to be honest, it's going to, you know, actually get much worse as these chapters progress. But what I would look to do is I would really look to creep out my players by really playing up the weirdness and bizarreness of these changes. And it is mentioned, it's not really delved into as much as I would have liked, but it is touched upon that your player characters should be changing as well, because they're being exposed to this strange energy also. So what they're going to find out is there are 3 pieces of this obelisk that are scattered nearby. So they are going to set off. One is a temple, one is a crypt, and the other is a kind of a crossroads in the Underdark. And hopefully they're able to get their hands on these pieces of the obelisk as opposed to the forces they're arrayed against. Because if the player characters don't get these 3 pieces, they're going to find things more difficult at the climax of the adventure. Here's that crossroads I was talking about. I personally like the cartography in these books. I know there was a commenter for the first look video. They were saying they're really bland. I don't find them to be all that bland. I think they're fine. You certainly wouldn't be utilizing these as virtual tabletop maps. But as far as maps for the Dungeon Master to utilize, they're far better than what we used to get with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, folks. I'll tell you that much. All right. As I mentioned in that chapter, we're hopefully going to have the player characters obtain those 3 pieces of the obelisk. Chapter 7, we start seeing more shifts in reality in this Rifts in Reality chapter. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a bit of a Lovecraftian vibe, and some of it's kind of played upon with like these entries here, right? So we've got Shadow over Phandelver, and then we also have the doom that came to Phandelver. So there is a bit of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, a little bit of Lovecraftian cosmic horror going on. So hopefully throughout these chapters, your player characters are returning to Phandelver to see these changes taking place. Once again, driving home the fact that they need to stop these mind flayers sooner rather than later, because a lot of these townspeople are getting very close to making the final ascension. But once again, you don't want to force your players into returning to the town. If they're just going to kind of go from one locale to another locale, kind of going through these chapters, kind of like single-mindedly, doggedly going from one adventure location to another adventure location, then I would probably play up their transformations far more. And I do understand there are some players out there probably aren't going to be into a whole body horror sort of thing going on. If that were the case, I would just skip it. I would not force their players to be undergoing some sort of transformation, but I would try to play off the changes that are going on in the town much more. So what's going to happen here is the player character is going to find that there is this far realm that they need to go to, and these mind flayers are actually being manipulated. They're worshiping this godlet from the far realms, and it turns out they're also being manipulated. So I thought it was kind of interesting that as you continue to kind of uncover layer after layer of what's going on in this adventure, a lot of the NPCs that you think are in control, they're the ones, they're the ones behind all this. Turns out that they're being used by somebody else. So I do like that quite a lot. So then we get into our final chapter, Beyond a Lightless Star. There you go. Doom comes to Phandelver. So this is where the player characters are going to find themselves in the far realm, which is supposed to be really, really strange. So you want to try to play that up as a dungeon master, just the weirdness and how physics and reality don't work the same way here as they would in the game world. So in fact, this is one of the major areas here. The players probably won't realize that it's in kind of the shape of a brain. So they're gonna travel through here. They're gonna find these different nodes with like really odd, strange goings on. And then after they've checked out, if I remember correctly, it's 5 of these nodes. They're gonna actually find the node that contains our big bad. And that is where the player characters are going to have one hell of a battle on their hands in order to defeat just a portion of this godlet's power. And if they're able to defeat the refraction of Ilvash, then they're not going to destroy the far realm, but make it where they need to escape, because the player characters are going to run across all these other NPCs in the far realm, and not all of them are going to be evildoers. They're going to find some allies as well in here. And once they defeat the refraction, make them think that the realm is falling apart, because everybody's skedaddling. Everybody's looking to try to get out. Then we get an epilogue. We get some information about if you want to continue this adventure. There are some recommendations. There's one of the adventures through the Radiant Citadel that fits in nicely. And there's just, a few nuggets that you can pursue. Then we wrap up. We get a bestiary and some new magic items. And that is, we get a story tracker, which really isn't all that important. And we don't get a ton of new magic items. So you don't get a ton of new creatures either, but they're pretty solid throughout. Like I said, we wrap up actually with the story tracker, which you can use or not. It's just for taking notes. Some thoughts about each of the chapters in Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk. Let me swing on over to the other camera. I'm going to share some final thoughts, and I'm going to give this a review score. So there's a lot I like in Phandelver and Below. There's a lot of stuff that it's just the same old problems that I have with D&D releases, that they just rear their heads again. And I guess I got to get to the point where it's like, well, you know what? That's their design philosophy. That's how it's always going to be. Just overall, I find there's far fewer opportunities to parlay or avoid conflict, to avoid combat than I would like to see. So we have that. We also have some situations where it's like, well, this NPC shows up, and if the player characters can't actually find the information because maybe they didn't roll well enough when they're investigating like the crime scenes, well, they're going to piece everything together for them anyway. Once again, I never understand that. I don't understand if you're going to have situations where the player characters are trying to discover information, clues, what have you, and they don't, that you're just going to hand it over to them from an NPC. If that's the case, why go through the process of them having to roll dice and possibly fail? And well, what is the point of that? Just so you can roll dice. We see some of that. We also see everything's got to be a challenge rating, challenge level that's equal to the player characters, something I'm not a fan of either. But then again, I'm old school. So back in the days when I played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which wasn't for very long, actually, by like 81, we were already moved on to Call of Cthulhu and other role-playing games. But back when I would play, it was like, you ran a lot. You were like, hey, we can't handle, or you would try to talk your way out of situations or bribe your way through situations or try to deceive the monsters and things like that. Not so much here. It's more kind of straightforward. Okay, there are some opportunities for the players to avoid getting into combat with some of the NPCs, some of the monsters, but not a ton. And that's, like I said, it's just something that's kind of the design philosophy of Dungeons and Dragons adventures these days. It is what it is. All in all, I think this is solid. I don't think it's fantastic. And I think it's actually a drawback that the first 4 chapters actually come from Lost Mine of Phandelver, because even though it's being considered a remaster, to me, it's more of a rehash. And some of the things that actually stood out about the adventure as an introductory adventure had been lost. And now, as I had pointed out previously, it's sort of been there, done that. Oh, escorting a wagon. Okay. Oh, attacked by goblins. Ooh. Oh, I haven't had that happen before. But still, it's not bad. As a whole, I do like Dungeons and Dragons, Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk. It's not anywhere near as bad as some D&D releases have been in the recent past. I can tell you that much. But it is still not some of the best 5e D&D that I have seen. It's no Tomb of Annihilation. It is no Wild Beyond the Witchlight by any stretch of the imagination. But it is solid. It's pretty good. And a good dungeon master could make it super creepy with that far realm energy that's corrupting all of Phandelver and its environs. So keep that in mind too. On a score of 0 to 10, I gave Dungeons and Dragons Phandelver, the Shattered Obelisk, a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's worth picking up. Now, some of you out there who already have the starter set might be wondering, should you get this hardcover? I mean, there's enough new material there that you will get a solid amount of role-playing sessions out of. But it all depends. If your players have already played through Lost Mine of Phandelver, this is kind of a pick 'em. I would say it's kind of up to you. But still, I do like this D&D release. It's just not one of the greatest 5e adventures that I've encountered. All right, so as I promised, I'm going to reveal the winner of my copy of the Friendly Local Game Store edition of D&D Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk. Boy, that just does not roll off the tongue. That is kind of a mouthful. And the winner is Steve Lynch. So to enter the contest, you had to be a subscriber. I asked, hopefully, that you would thumb up the video. And I did ask for you to provide me with your favorite low-level D&D character class. And if memory serves me correctly, Steve said the cleric, which we didn't get a lot of clerics. We got a lot of rogues. We got a lot of warlocks. And I think all in all, I think the rogue pretty much came out on top. A lot of barbarians, not too many paladins. I was kind of surprised. So congratulations, Steve. What you need to do is you need to send an email to jeffmcaleer@thegaminggang.com from your Google Gmail address that's associated with your YouTube account. That way I can tell that it's really you. All right, so congrats to Steve. And once again, Dungeons & Dragons, Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk from Wizards of the Coast is arriving in stores on September 19th, carrying an MSRP of $59.95. You can also get that bundle with the book and digital release from D&D Beyond for that very same $59.95, at least as I record this. And you will get access to the book digitally tomorrow. So keep that in mind. All right, that's it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching the video. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, here's hoping all of you out there get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.